recognize that this is maybe beyond the extent of your research, but one of the things that's really interesting to me is why, sort of, what made Grinnell unique and sort of particularly fertile to the idea of self-governance. So did you have run across any information for what was going on in our peer institutions with this idea?
Yeah, Grinnell has always thought of itself as quite different in terms of its idea of self-governance. There's a story in the S&B, I think in like 65, in which the deans go to a conference in Chicago and kind of tell everybody about self-governance, and all the rest of the deans of the college go, oh, wait, what? So that there is always this idea that Grinnell is different. Talking to Wally Walker, he really kept saying, no, Grinnell was different. And Grinnell, especially in the 60s, just when you even protest about Vietnam, that Grinnell was a very different place. I would guess that, you know, it goes back to our ideas about social responsibility and, you know, all of those ideas about that when they are at Grinnell's founding that caused self-governance to be something that we're talking about in college catalogs way back in the beginning. John?
You mentioned about how they kind of approach the topic from an idea of like, this isn't about sex, like we want to emphasize the platonic nature and like ambiguous and violence, but, and maybe this is kind of like a sensationalist question, but like, so did you ever sense in your research that there was a push to like, know that some people believed it to be actually about sex and about like
yes. No, yeah, I mean obviously, like why do students pick like the big issue is sex? I mean, obviously it's because sex is important to people. So really like, but I think that it's, you know, you can tell a funny story about like self-governance exists because people want to have sex, ha ha ha. Which like to some extent is true, but the really important thing that I'm trying to emphasize is that students really also were thinking about the big picture, and it's not just a selfish move to like have more sex.
I see.
You mentioned something about how President Light was concerned about the media, like hearing wind of all these things.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you came across anything in like the old S&Ds that talked about the town-town relations aspect of it. Were like people in the town concerned about having like this den of sin, like all the students are fornicating with one another? Or I mean, did the students even care, or were they paying attention to like all of that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. The SME doesn't seem to pay much attention to town. They pay attention to people's parents. They pay attention to like donors and alumni. And so there's always kind of this fear of like, what will they think? But there are parents who write to the SME and say this rule is ridiculous. So there's a variety of opinions on that, but they don't seem to really talk about town so much.
I know that Grinnell has always framed itself and self-governance as being different from peer institutions, but you think that in the broader context of the 1960s, when these sort of movements were going on all over the world, that Grinnell actually was that different, and that the students, given the precedent of self-governance at Grinnell, they have significantly different ideas about these things than students in other schools?
Well, there's always this idea like, you know, Grinnell were the activists. And so I kind of see like you could go either way with the answer to this question. At one point you've got professors writing into the S&D, students writing S&D going, what happened to activist Grinnell? Sound familiar. But this idea of like, we're supposed to be the activists, why aren't we? And like clearly, you know, at Columbia and Berkeley, important things are happening other places. But then like talking to Wally Walker, he said that his daughter was in high school in the 60s and you know, would come visit Grinnell and everyone would be protesting and there'd be huge Vietnam rallies and he was in some talent show and he started a talent show and they're all like protesting him while he's trying to perform. And then she actually said, I don't really want to go to a school like that, and ended up going to McAllister, which she saw as a very different kind of school. And so I asked him, I said, well, hey, do you think that in the 60s Grinnell was a different place than the rest of liberal arts colleges in the US? And he said definitely. I don't know to what extent that is true, but I think that's an interesting idea. Good job.
So you have to know, so you mentioned how like it mentions donors and alumni and what they think. So did this have an effect on the amount of money and funds that people were contributing?
By the time, I don't actually know the specific data on that, but by the time we get to 67, 69, it's not really a very big issue anymore. It's the fall of 67 when Carleton Extends opens until 1 a.m. So, and so Grinnell actually ends up following, you're gonna talk about why they're different, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. Grinnell really is looking and seeing what are other schools doing about co-ed visitation, and is not on the forefront of that. So I think that that probably helps calm donors and parents down as they're seeing all sorts of other schools. There's a Life magazine cover from 1970 with 2 Oberlin students sitting, you know, holding hands in their dorm room. That's the idea of co-ed dorm, but it's a national issue already, and so I think that donors and, you know, the older generation are less concerned about it specifically for them.